All right. Welcome. Another episode of 0x Research. Today, Mark and I from the Blockworks research team are joined by a big cast of Rollup related, L2 related, various spaces within the ETH Rollup and L2 ecosystem. We've got Lewis from Gelato, Leland at Succinct, Hubert with L2Beat, and M Team of Spire Labs. How's everyone doing today? Glad to have you all on.
I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome.
Yeah, great to be here. Perfect day, perfect timing to discuss Ethereum L2s, I think, after yesterday's FUD, I suppose, mix of FUD. Like everybody is FUDing each other, I feel, but yeah, perfect timing.
Yeah, there's been, I think, some hot topics here around, we're getting into one of those conversations on TT, at least again, around good for ETH, bad for ETH. You've got a lot of large companies, corporations, and even crypto adjacent teams announcing like new L1s that maybe are EVM based, but perhaps surprising that they're not, rollups or L2s specifically. The Stripe paradigm, Tempo chain. You've got Circle with, I think it's Arc. There's been several other recently in the past, maybe weeks to months. Curious your guys' takes on, what are your thoughts here? Maybe just open it up, like, if you want to hop into is this bullish, bearish ETH, or just what this means for like the L1 versus L2 relationship? What do we think this means kind of going forward, and how are we thinking about it?
Yeah, I'm happy to open the floor here, although I'm already looking forward to all the other spicy takes. So yeah, from my end, first of all, I'm Lewis. I'm the co-founder of Gelato, and we have been running various services on EVM chains. Originally Ethereum, like 6 years ago, I think we started the project. But we're also very much known for our Rollup as a service offering, powering chains like Kraken's Inc. chain that's running on Gelato, Raya chain, that's a perp DEX, Open Campus, Arena Z. We have a bunch of these chains, and we deployed these chains into production for 2 years now, and we gathered a lot of information on how our real customers and their users actually using Rollup technology. What are they doing on their chains? What do they care about? I would say the way I read this Stripe L1, Circle's Arc L1, Google's L1 or whatever, is in reality, L2s are ready-ish, but they're also not really ready. At least not in the original way that they were meant to work and were envisioned by Ethereum. And back in the day, L2s were meant to inherit Ethereum security. That was the whole point. Ethereum came to the conclusion that the L1 alone wouldn't scale for the world's use cases, for the Stripe payment chain or whatnot. So I think Ethereum is already very much better positioned than a chain like Solana to actually deal with the fact that there's huge companies with their own use cases that want to build chains like Stripe, right? Like Stripe launching their payments thing on Solana would be really, I think, no one is even considering that. But they could have launched an Ethereum L2 and they didn't, right? And why did they decide to go with their own L1? I mean, best would be to ask them themselves, but I'm sure they will put out some statements. My own personal take is, sure, there's always like an L1 premium type thing. I think there's a lot of projects considering L1s because they think it will pump their token or valuations more. There's some truth to that. I don't think that's a major factor for Stripe. We all know that they're like a private company that wants to stay private for as long as possible, probably. So who knows? Maybe they have some degen token play there. Paradigm is involved, so I'm sure there's some token play as well. But I don't think so much, to be honest, that that's the major factor. I think I could imagine that they want to build something huge here. Like, I think they want to shake up the world. And right now, having a centralized single sequencer server is not really that big. I mean, Base has been killing it. Coinbase has been killing it on their server. But I think Stripe is thinking bigger than that. And in reality, you can't really do that today so well with Ethereum because we currently lack the technological maturity of rollup based sequencing technology. We lack the technological maturity of native rollups. So we still have single sequencers, like single boxes servers, like Arbitrum, Coinbase, many of the chains that we are running, Gelato chains, like a single sequencer boxes. That's very different from what Ethereum is, right? And I think Stripe's aspiration is to be similar to what Ethereum is, and but for payments, right? And we still have security councils and multi-sigs securing our L2s. So like that is also not Ethereum, right? Ethereum is not a multi-sig. It's a network of validators, right? And I think Stripe, even though they start fairly centralized, what I found really bullish, I think in general was very bullish that they are launching a chain for payments. That's usually bullish for the space. Like that's 100% PMF for blockchains for global payments. That's so sick. But what I was also bullish on in their announcement is that they put in there that they said that they want to become permissionless at some point and progressively decentralized, which just means is that they want to become like Ethereum. But they can't because there's no base sequencing, like at least not at scale in production readiness today. There's no native rollups. There are no native rollups today. So they would have to opt for a single server box. They would have to opt for multi-sigs and smart contract upgradability. And last but not least, ZK is, we have Leland here from Succinct. ZK, I think, is also really what was missing from Ethereum rollups. The big ones today, Arbitrum based, they all have optimistic fraud proofs. And that just means their settlement times are insanely slow, 7-day windows. And that is, very far removed. I mean, Ethereum is mocked for being slow, but like if you look at an L2 through the lens of how close is it to Ethereum, 7 days is definitely much slower than Ethereum is, right? So I think this combination of the lack currently, Ethereum's lack of base sequencing, base pre-confirmation technology, its lack of native rollup technology to supplant the need for different sort of proof system implementations and multi-sigs guarding them, and the lack of ZK and Ethereum rollups is like this trifactum is essentially really isn't positioning Ethereum as a very strong candidate for a Stripe L2 if their ambition is to be global decentralized permissionless right now. That's just, we have to be honest to ourselves as Ethereums. But the good news is we can very much get there, and we've seen the first wave of rollups. They've built some great technology, and now it's time for wave 2. I'm sure many rollups will update, like many of the current day rollups like Arbitrum, they will also participate in phase 2. We've seen this announcement. Congrats, by the way, Leland, that Succinct is working with Arbitrum on a ZK version. Who would have thought? So the good news is we can get Ethereum to a stage where Stripe would have launched on there, but we're simply not there yet today. So yeah, that would wrap up my long speech here. Thanks for waiting for me.
Yeah, I'll jump in here real quick to say, like, I totally agree from the perspective that you're coming at here, which is like, it's not so much about these companies that are launching their ones. It's like about Ethereum. And I think people way too often question, like, is something bullish or bearish for ETH without that thing being about Ethereum. If it's a Solana upgrade, then maybe there's competition pressures with Ethereum, but I think it's much more valuable to actually look at what Ethereum is doing. And you said it great there. There's like a few pieces of technology that we've been waiting for: layer 1 scaling, data availability, sampling, ZK. So put all these things together, and I think you have a much more appealing kind of technical stack for layer 2. If I had to guess at like why these layer 1s are not layer 2s, I would say it's probably, you know, Matt and the Stripe board got into a room and said we should launch a layer 1 together, and no one even brought up it should be a layer 2. I think it's just not a there's not enough of a value proposition from an economic perspective of being a layer 2. I think John actually said earlier on Twitter, where he said the greatest advantage of being a layer 2 is you could just siphon users away from Ethereum layer 1. And I think for many chains, that's a really good distribution mechanism, right? Because a lot of they want to get Etherland, so a lot of their users are on layer 1, a lot of liquidity they can get from layer 1. But for someone like Stripe, I think they're looking for a different class of users. They're looking for banks, they're looking for small businesses, and they're looking for like e-commerce. And those just kind of things just don't exist on layer 1. They could at some point in the future, and I think they will exist quite prominently on layer 2s. But for Stripe, I think the appeal of being a part of the Ethereum ecosystem just isn't worth it for them. Yeah, that's my take.
And I would maybe just add that now it's probably the last possible moment to launch an L1. Also, that's why I called them like the Alt L1 final boss. Because if you think about it, we are in this pivotal moment when after a couple of years of developing L2s, the tech is slowly getting ready to all of those big updates like based and native, right? Because like 3-4 years ago, without all of this ZK research and development, I don't think anybody would even, would think about native rollups in like next 5 to 10 years from back then. So I also think that's maybe a bit more strategic for them to get as big of a cut from the pie as they can.
I see. I mean, I think the main reason why they went with the L1 is probably because they want like more customizability. I think all these chains will have some level of like block lists or allow lists, and they've already like mentioned this in their like press release. And so ultimately, I see these new L1s as like very bullish for crypto, but and gives like even more credit to EVM because both Tempo and Circle like upfront said like, oh, we're supporting EVM. Whether it's like EVM equivalent is like still to be determined, and like there may be some nightmares over there. I mean but that overall will mean like more tooling for the EVM and just more general awareness for crypto overall. And I think like as time evolves, like as L1s become more mature, maybe like they will reconsider their like L1 stance, or like future chain, like I guess like future like corporate chains will be like, like they'll maybe do like Robinhood and like, oh, actually we want to go full like Arbitrum, like why roll our own stack? Because rolling your own stack is also like way more difficult too.
I think it's also an interesting question to ask what would convince them to go the L2 way in the future, right? That's an interesting question to ask. And I think while I agree with your point, M-Team, that Stripe probably didn't care about any of the liquidity or users on Ethereum. And one way to look at L2s is, like you said, you can siphon off, or you can take liquidity and users from Ethereum to your chain. I mean, technically that thesis would have to play out for Unichain. I'm not sure how well it's going there. But I think there's also simple infrastructure technology aspects that Ethereum is very well positioned for, that have nothing to do with the L1, that make it attractive as a settlement / data availability layer for L2s. And there, I think, I mean, that's technically, that's the whole point of rollups. At least, for example, the way that Celestia looks at rollups is they're just chains that post their data to another chain for like data availability consensus. Like Cosmos had this idea, right? Like, why is Stripe not building a Cosmos chain? It's also an interesting question, right? Why they're not building a Cosmos L1, and why are they not using that stack? And I think like the reason for Stripe to move to an L2 model would be if their stakeholders and operators in the system would be able to reduce their cost basis massively, because these global networks, they do cost money, right? Like Ethereum has a lot of costs as well. I don't know if you guys at Blockworks have data on this, how much does it cost to run the Ethereum network? I'm sure there's figures across all of the nodes and validators, right? They have to be paid. Like essentially, what are we buying as L1s or L2s with our money is like we're buying data availability consensus, like we're buying decentralization, right? The problem with the current L2s is that they were supposed to therefore also become really decentralized on Ethereum, and they're not today. And I think Stripe wants to be decentralized. I actually think that they honestly, like, again, their goal is as big as Ethereum's goal, right? Like they want to be just like Ethereum, a global, permissionless, decentralized network for payments at some point. The funny thing about Ethereum's positioning, though, is technically Ethereum is positioned and wants to position as a network layer to build other Ethereums on top, right? And right now, like with a single L2 single sequencer server box, that's not an aspiration like to be another Ethereum, right? Like Ethereum is not a single server box. But with base rollups, native rollups, ZK rollups, you can really build on top of Ethereum another Ethereum that is has one thing that is different. It doesn't need to spin up its own validator consensus layer anymore. That's the point of a rollup, right? But it can focus on execution and application-specific use cases. So I think there's a massive, there might be a massive pull for Stripe eventually to update to become an L2 once it's evident that they can achieve similar level of decentralization worldwide by building on top of Ethereum as a based L2. And yeah, like I think Ethereum wants to be like, it's almost like it's positioned as Ethereum as a service. But the reality is today, you can't really do that because the tech isn't quite ready. And the good news is you will be able to do that very soon if we keep pushing for base pre-conf technology, keep pushing for ZK, keep pushing for native rollups. I think native rollups out of the three is the least developed thus far. But yeah, so I think that's the interesting question. And if you can, as a network, achieve the same degrees of decentralization, and then there's always an existential question of like, okay, why do we even want decentralization, right? And I think the reason is to span global jurisdictions, to have credible neutrality, to have permissionless innovation, permissionless payments at some point be done on your platform. And I believe these are all goals that Stripe probably aligns with, and they actually want to build themselves right now because, I mean, first of all, yes, it's a big story for them, but also probably right now they see an easier path to get there by rebuilding the L1 from scratch right now, because L2s don't give you like this nice template for achieving Ethereum level decentralization right now. It right now probably still see, if you're serious about it, there's a path of being an L1 to get there, right? Like Ethereum has shown that path, Solana has shown that path to various degrees, and the path for an L2 to be truly decentralized is not really laid out. I mean, what L2 truly is, right? Like I think Tycho and so on, they tried, but to be honest here, it's not as proven as an Ethereum as a Solana, right? So I think they are big enough to do what the big guys already did, because they know that can work, and they maybe don't feel the need to be the first to prove that you can also do this as an L2, because like, why be the first if you're big enough to go a proven route already and have less uncertainty there.
Yeah, so let me just add to that. I pretty much agree with most of those takes, because if you will like even check L2Beat.com right now, there is not a single like stage 2 a general purpose rollup that is actually having any canonical value on it. And yeah, it's the same story with like based and native ones, right? So yeah, we don't really like I love what Arbitrum team is doing, right? I love what Optimist team is doing with their like stage 1 implementation, but as you mentioned, they are still mostly optimistic. At least like I would say like 70 to 80% of all TVL is on the optimistic ones, right? So this 7-day waiting periods, all of this is not something that a team like Stripe would like to go with right now. I know, there is OP Succinct, I know there is Spire, right, and all of those other options, but they are they are just starting, and yeah, I think they will be moving very, very fast. So, and their plan is, as you mentioned, to go as big as possible. So they can't allow themselves to wait.
I mean, the theme here is that, maybe Ethereum didn't capture this new vertical because the tech isn't mature enough. But to be candid, I mean, I'm going to leave native rollups out of this because it's a little bit newer. But to be candid, I've been hearing about based rollups for 5 years. It was called something else. It was called Anarchy when Vitalik wrote that blog post about it. I've been hearing about ZK for like, I don't know, 6 years plus now. And it's like, oh, ZK is moving a lot faster than we thought. It's moving so much faster than we thought. But then like, where is it here now? I keep hearing that it's coming, but when is it actually going to come? Like when do we think that Ethereum is going to have this level of maturity that the next time a large payments company thinks about launching their own chain, at least an L2 is part of the conversation?
I would say definitely like ZK has advanced tremendously in the last 6 years. I would say like the first generation of ZK rollups, think of like ZK Stack, Aztec, like these came around roughly maybe 2 years ago. And then now you kind of have like the latest generation of ZK rollups of Succinct. So in the prior generation, like building on them was, I'll just say, a bit difficult. They weren't like, 100% EVM equivalent. Maybe some precompiles were missing. The DevX was quite horrible. They had their own fork of Anvil, yada, yada. But now with the latest generation of ZK rollups, such as like Succinct, which currently works for Optimism, there's like 2 chains live on mainnet. You can use the same tooling as if you're like deploying on Ethereum or like any like OP stack rollup, except now you have like faster finality. But I think what's ultimately unclear to me is like how fast of finality you need to have before larger institutions become like really excited about these types of tools. Like for example, like Base has been an optimistic rollup since the start, and they have a lot of assets that are just like issued natively, natively is the wrong word. They have a lot of canonical assets, or Coinbase issues assets directly onto Base that kind of entirely ignore like this like optimistic finality window. And like for them, like Base is just a chain. Like they don't, if it's optimistic, if it's ZK, like maybe it doesn't really matter because they're just issuing assets directly onto it and just assuming that there'll never be like a challenge. And so the question is like how good or how fast does like finality need to be for like ZK rollups before I guess customers are issuing assets like through the like natively on the L1 and bridging it via the canonical bridge instead of using like a third-party bridge. And so I think that's like the big open question today. It's like, is 1 hour finality enough, or does it need to be like way faster?
Yeah, I really like your question, Mark. Because it's definitely true. I've been hearing about ZK for a very long time. I've also been hearing about Base for a longer time. M-Team definitely has been very prolific, tweeting about it for some time. I think there is another, like, ultimately we have to go back to the question, not so much why is Stripe not launching an L2, or the real question is why are they launching a chain, right? Because like actually we are on Twitter fighting about, whoa, why is it an L1 not an L2? Like the interesting question is why do they even launch a chain to begin with, right? So we go back to the fundamentals of blockchain, like what are they there for? And I think blockchains where they really shine still, like the original vision for blockchain still, especially in a world where ZK is used for verifiable execution, is for censorship resistance, global neutrality, and like what this affords you is like permissionlessness, like you being viewed as a neutral platform, and that should lead to the whole world adopting your ledger, your chain for finance and payments and whatnot, right? And like according to their statements, Stripe is on a mission to build that as well, right? Like they purposefully put permissionlessness as a North Star for them in their announcement. So they're building for that reason, I think, because Otherwise, why the hell would they use, like, why the hell would they build like their own blockchain, like in terms of longevity, right? So I still think that they probably have a grand big vision. They're not just there like saying, oh, let's launch a chain for the fun and joke. They probably have a huge vision for this, which is like replacing how global payments are done nowadays, with replacing Western Union, replacing whatever other payment systems you have there, right? Like the real loser here isn't Ethereum. I think Ethereum ultimately, even though they went the L1 way, still benefits from this. The real loser here is supposed to be probably Western Union or any of these old payment systems that Stripe is going after with blockchain technology, right? But like, this will come back to the question, like if they actually want the highest degree of decentralization, this is the whole like what is Ethereum saying? Like they are saying we're the most decentralized and we have proof for it, right? And that's why like that's Ethereum's stance against Solana and everything else, right? And the idea of Ethereum L2s was to get that as well, pretty much. Yeah, I think if Stripe is on that mission, then at some point, once the tech is ready, it will simply be sure, right? Like maybe right now there's a way for you as an L1 to progressively build that up, but once the tech is ready and proven, once base native ZK is ready and proven, there is this sort of escape velocity, or like this great filter moment where it's like from one day to the next, you can spin up a chain and it's from day one as decentralized as Ethereum. And I think that's super hard to compete with your own L1. And at that point, we won't be like at that point, you can build a global decentralized payments network very cheaply on top of Ethereum, and just you're essentially renting from that validator system that was already built up over decades, right? I always come back to that. I know, Mark, your question was like, okay, isn't it about time for that tech to be ready? Like we've been hearing about it for so many years. In reality, these things take way longer. Base is fairly new. I think Total Anarchy was an initial idea from Vitalik that was abandoned for many years and then picked up again much later. ZK, I think the Succinct team, like from what I've been hearing from them and customers using them, Hibachi and many others, is like they have made some breakthroughs in the last year. You always have to be careful with ZK marketing. I say we at Gelato we were running ZK EVMs with Polygon 2 years ago. It was way too early. We found out the hard way. But like at the same time, I think it's getting ready for ZK. Native rollup still a big question, but I think native rollups is mostly a standardization effort anyways. And Base, I mean, I think M Team is building there. We've also at Gelato working with a project called Gattaca. They're building there. So there's stuff happening, and we have testnets, Base testnets. So it is going in a direction. I think we have to be a little bit more patient. But at the same time, it's important that we create this urgency and we don't become complacent and get this inertia. The wake-up call here is L2s aren't finished yet, even though Coinbase has one with billions of TVL in there. That's not the final form of L2s. This ain't even my final form, right? Like there's a next wave coming. And I think, so stay tuned for the next wave of L2s. Too bad that Stripe already wants to launch now. But I wouldn't say the chance is zero that they won't upgrade to an L2 model in the far future. Like not far, but maybe like who knows, maybe 5 years from now.
Lewis, like what would be the feature spec, like this features of like the next generation of L2s? Like how do you define? Like what is what is that definition of it? Is like an hour finality, 1 minute finality? Like what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, actually, I think
jump in here real quick. I think there's a temptation to like think about the features that like we care about as like nerds building this stuff. But I think like most practical, ideal next generation rollup for me would be instant withdrawals to layer 1. So call it a withdrawal, just like moving tokens. I want more than that. I wouldn't do any contract call from my layer 2 to layer 1 instantly. And we know it's possible. Like we've done the research. Spire is building it for layer 3s and layer 2s right now. There's no reason you couldn't put that onto layer 1. And I think the ideal case is the ideal features, I should say, are instant deposits, instant withdrawals, and those deposits and instant withdrawals can be whatever you want, anything cross-chain, and developers can have a seamless experience doing it. That's like very developer-facing though. For users, I think there's very much a demand for lower latency. It's like it's like the Amazon thing. Users will always want faster deliveries. Users will always want faster transactions, cheaper transactions, and we can get there. We have the technology and we have the research. Now it's just a scale issue of putting it all together. And I do want to hear from you on how Gelato's thinking about that as well.
Yeah, 100%. So there's this whole article that I wrote on ETH research, and we also worked on a version of it with Blockworks, which goes very much into data on current L2s. And there's this Ethereum settlement score, ESS, that I propose very much to L2Beat, to Hubert and the team here, trying to get them to derive value from what I'm proposing there. It's drawing upon what they built already, a lot of the data that they have already as well. But it's just this new way of sort of measuring what an L2, how close to Ethereum an L2 is. Like it's measuring the Ethereumness of an L2, right? And with the goal here being that as an L2, your decision is, okay, I don't want to launch on Ethereum because it's too slow, it's too expensive, but I do want to have the same level of global distribution, decentralization, and censorship resistance that Ethereum has. And if you have a perfect ESS score of 1, then you are basically like Ethereum. That's the meme. It's a score from 0 to 1. It's spicy because technically all current L2s would get a straight 0. There's not a single non-zero L2 today. And 1 is a bit of a mimetic North Star. I think you can be very, like, achieving a score of 0.2 on the Ethereum settlement score is already pretty high. I could share my screen here. I don't know. Anyways, check it out on ETH research, Ethereum settlement score. It's a post that check it out on Blockworks. There's an article that we published. But to get to your question, like, yes, it's about instant deposits. That's the bridging part from the L1 to the L2. But for me, really, it's a question of, hey, who's securing this deposit, right? Is it Ethereum, or is it some third-party bridge provider that you hope will never be hacked, will never see a server hack, right? And Lazarus will have a much easier time hacking all of the bridges that we use nowadays that already provide you with instant deposits. Because as a normal user, you think, wait a second, instant deposits, they already exist, right? But in reality, it's like a third-party bridge provider that gives that abstracts it for you today. It's not Ethereum that is securing that transfer or that asset. So I think that's why ZK is so important, and I know that's also what you meant, MT probably, right? Like getting to instant canonical bridging, like instant asset transfer of Ethereum assets between Ethereum and the L2s that only involves ZK math and doesn't involve a third-party server that everybody prays doesn't get hacked, right? That will definitely make your rollup more like Ethereum. And I mean, Stripe, like it's an interesting question, like is Stripe going to have proof of stake? I actually didn't look that up, but what is even securing the chain, right? Like what are their validators doing? Is it proof of authority? At which point it's basically like a very centralized consortium chain. I think they have bigger aspirations like that. But if it's proof of stake, you can very easily also measure the security of Stripe versus Ethereum. And I'm sure they would be interested in acquiring more security, right? If they want to be the global payments network. Security doesn't sound too bad. Like not having fraud and payments reverting and whatnot on your chain would be very great. And that's what Ethereum is known for, right? So yeah, I think achieving a similar level to Ethereum security means the rollup has to be ZK. All of the assets on the rollup have to be on Ethereum. And then you get instant bridging into the rollup, and very important transaction inclusion. That's what L1s are good at. If they're decentralized, you have a decentralized validator set, meaning that you, even if one validator censors you, another one will include you. This doesn't exist today on rollups. There's forced inclusion mechanisms, but they're quite naive. They take 24 hours or so to clear on Arbitrum. Technically, there's a multi-sig that can still censor you, I think. I think that's what stage 2 is about, if I'm not mistaken, L2Beat. But yeah, like censorship resistance, that's really important. Getting your transaction included in the ledger on time, that's what Ethereum is really good at. And for that, we need base sequencing. We essentially need users to like get the confirmations of inclusion from the L1 validators, even though they're transacting on a rollup. And yeah, last but not least, we should remove multi-sig that secures everything like it is on today on L2s. And yeah, so again, I recommend everybody listening to this pod read my ETH research post, Ethereum settlement score. I come with a lot of great data in there about current rollups. And the essence of the Ethereum settlement scores is essentially not just saying that we should use base sequencing to get censorship resistance on rollups, or that we should use decay to get instant deposits, improving latencies and withdrawals. It's also using empirical data from your rollup, saying, okay, how are the users using the rollup? What are the assets on the rollup? Are they actually assets that exist on Ethereum, or are they just minted on the rollup L2? At which point Ethereum is basically completely out of the picture. I think someone just mentioned that with tokens on base like Kaito or others that basically don't even have a record on Ethereum. And like Vitalik recently said, Ethereum wants to be the world ledger. If you have a native asset on the L2 that doesn't exist on Ethereum, the L2 asset in this sense is definitely not using Ethereum as the world ledger. And yeah, there's other things like canonical bridge volumes and this and that. But yeah, to cut this story short, in a hypothetical world where you can deploy an L2 and you get Ethereum level of censorship resistance and decentralization with that L2, like that world we don't live in now. I think if we lived in that world, maybe Stripe would have gone that way. And I think we can get there.
Cool. I actually have to drop in just a couple minutes. So I'll kind of get some closing thoughts here. I think that there's a lot of exciting things happening in Ethereum on the technology side, but none of it really matters until we can get it in front of users and in front of institutions. There's a lot of really great teams that are pushing for that. I think L2Beat is doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes that's super, super helpful on that side. I just want to shout out Etherealize and all the work that they're doing with TradFi institutions as well. I think that, yeah, just final closing thought, we should all take a little bit more time to think about what Ethereum is doing that's bullish for ETH or bearish for ETH, instead of constantly comparing it to these projects that aren't even live yet. So that's my closing thoughts. Thanks, OX Research. It's been great. Bye, guys.
Awesome. Thanks for hopping on, M Team. Before we jump over to the next couple of topics, I'm going to do a quick shout out for our sponsors for today's show. First off, before we get to the sponsors, Blockworks itself, we are hiring a research data analyst. So if you live in SQL, you love on-chain data, and making sense of it, check out the link in the show notes and apply, or check the QR code. Oh, that's the new newsletter QR code. Sorry. Check the link in the show notes to apply. We would love to hear from you guys. Actively hiring, and data is, of course, the core of the Blockworks business. So definitely want to hear from you on that. Shout out to our sponsors for today, though. Aptos. Bitcoin DeFi is heating up on Aptos with nearly 400 million in BTC assets on chain. Aptos users can now earn yield on their Bitcoin via Echo aBTC and OKX xBTC without the typical bridge risks and high fees. Thanks again, Aptos, for sponsoring today's stream, as well as Eigenlayer. Is your treasury losing value to inflation? Learn how to make digital assets like ETH and SOL productive with uncorrelated protocol-driven staking rewards. For CFOs, DATs, and corporate treasurers, the path to integrating liquid staking and restaking should be risk managed and aligned with long-term strategic goals. The Productive Treasury Report from Liquid Collective and EigenCloud outlines practical adoption and a forward-looking vision for the role of the modern treasury as a strategic enabler of new technology. Read the Productive Treasury Report today by following the link in today's show notes. Thank you to today's sponsors. Let's jump back into it. I think, Lewis, M Team kind of left us off there with a nice note. You started to jump into a couple of different ideas. I think there's maybe two directions we could go here. One is around this idea of like kind of where bridges are today, canonical versus sort of like third-party bridging, as well as like this idea of how we, measure, giving scores to things and using those as like targets. When it comes to L2s and rollups specifically, it's like, today there may be stage 1, stage 2, and we want them to be some ideal target in the future. I don't know, curious to jump wherever you guys are most interested, like this issue of, canonical versus external bridge usage? Like, why so much dominance of external bridges? And is this something that we see getting flipped at some point, or is this kind of like a harsh reality, inevitability that we just kind of have to deal with?
Yeah, so maybe I will just add some context to our viewers, because we at L2Beat actually have a framework to measure 3 different types of tokens on L2s. So you basically have canonically bridged assets. So the ones that use Ethereum as their main ledger, right? You have natively minted ones, so like stuff that was mentioned for Base, for example, that they issue their own tokens on their own chain, and externally bridged ones that rely on those either external blockchains, right, or using some third-party bridges. And maybe like 2 quick case studies. So like the first would be like the example I'm using is USDC on Arbitrum. So for example, on Arbitrum, you actually have 3 different types of USDC. So you have canonically bridged one, natively minted one, and the one that is using Circle CCTP. So like in case of Arbitrum going down, like technically speaking, all of those 3 would behave differently. I mean, like USDC is already pretty permissioned by design, but yeah, like in terms of like if Arbitrum would go down, in theory, having such a stable coin, if you would be the lucky one to have actually like the canonically bridged version, you could probably just come back to Ethereum, right? And that wouldn't be a big deal for you. But if you would have like a native one that might, look the same on frontend or whatever, right? Maybe you don't know what's the difference between USDC, USDC.E or whatever. Yeah, you would be, all of your assets would be lost / stuck, right?
Wait, Hubert, do you remember Saber on Solana?
No.
Okay, so this is like some lore from several years ago. So Solana used to not have any like natively issued USDC. So there were like 10 different bridged versions, and Saber was a DEX just for, I was switching between like different versions of USDC, and it was like really, really bad because like having 10 versions of like one stablecoin is horrible. Like, sorry, keep on going.
This was actually a great example. I'd love to jump in on that. Like, you'd have to bridge over from Wormhole, and then they'd give you some, XYZ, prefixed USDC, and then you had to go and swap it for some other one that was used the most in the liquidity pool. So yeah, it was a big problem at the time for sure.
Yeah, I would say it's still a big problem right now. Because like even if you look at our framework, like technically you, for example, let's like use another case study. So like Starknet versus Facet, right? So Starknet, I think everybody knows them, and Facet, this is like this newer rollup that is technically stage 2 by our framework. But the difference between those two, even though Starknet is stage 1, right? Like 100% of TVL on Starknet is canonical. So like every single token on Starknet is actually minted on Ethereum and then bridged back to Starknet. So like in case of Starknet going down, you will be always able to withdraw in a technically permissionless way. And with Facet, right, even though they are like stage 2 by design, actually like every single token is externally bridged, right? So like this stage 2 mark kinda doesn't mean anything in their case, right? So that's also what we try to explain to all of those TradFi guys or users. That's also part of our work, to actually make sure that they understand those little differences here and there. Yeah, and I think it will become more and more important, because you can actually see that a lot of those L2s have outages. So like I think like Starknet had one not so long ago, that there was like an outage on Scroll and so on, right? So I think people will care what type of those assets they are actually using. Maybe it's a bit technical for them, but we will try to make it more digestible to them. Yeah, but I would say that like this score by Lewis here is like very much needed, and that's something that is pretty much omitted by most of the teams right now. And that's also why I think that this based plus native development is so much needed, because why people are using external bridges, right? To actually have those benefits of like, you know, bridging faster, bridging like paying lower fees or whatever, and also utilizing their like vast BD efforts. So like layer 0 is probably the best example, because, you know, why would you use the canonical bridge when you can actually use Stargate or whatever and get like some additional incentives on top of that, right? So you can get an airdrop, you can, like, you know, you can bridge to optimism using layer 0 and get some OP tokens or whatever. So, you know, there are like you know, there are companies that want to make money, right? So they will always offer you probably a better deal, but, you know, there's always a trade-off for this type of things. So yeah, I think like everybody that is like interested should just jump on L2Beat at least once in their lifetime, and maybe just having a quick glance over all of this data that we present, and kind of try to come up with their own conclusions, I would say.
Hubert, in your opinion, like, what is like the ultimate design for bridging? Is it like canonical plus like a fast bridge, like a cross on top of it, or like, in your, like, what would you recommend?
I mean, like, I will be able to answer this question very, very soon. So like maybe like a little spoiler, but we are actually redesigning the whole bridges section on L2Beat that was kind of forgotten till now. And you will be able to check the origin of every single token, which bridge they are using, you know, what are the trade-offs, right, and so on. And we probably will probably create just another framework for all of those. But, you know, I'm incredibly neutral, and
I see.
and I think
okay.
And we will of course, like with stages, we'll probably give people like very high level overview of how we think they should approach those problems. So like I think, like, you know, with rollups, we don't like tell people like what to do exactly. There is like a lot of different ways to achieve stage 2, right? So I guess my answer is like, let's wait for a month or two, and then I will be like, we will make something as digestible as stages and risk rosette, and you will be able to, you know, make your own conclusions on that topic. So we need just little bit more time on that.
Yeah, I guess the big thing here to focus in on is there's this, at least as it stands today for a lot of cases, is the sort of convenience versus risk or security trade-off. And maybe the difficult part there is solving the convenience without sacrificing on that risk or security part of the puzzle. I don't know. Do you guys have big thoughts there on, you know, how solvable that is, or will the sort of like canonical solutions always sort of lag behind?
Yeah,
I wouldn't say they like. Okay, go on.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I have like the ideal L2 bridge, right? And when we talk about L2, like when we talk about the ideal bridge, it's very important to say that this is in the context of an Ethereum L2, because you can't do the same necessarily with like a bridge to Solana and then Ton and so on, right? Like I think there will always be some fragmentation and some trade-offs made if you want your token to be freely transferable between any chain outside of Ethereum as well. But within the context of Ethereum, like L2s were meant to be the extension of Ethereum and the multi-chain world around Ethereum, right? There, I think the ideal bridge design would be ZK. So and canonical. So that means every asset gets issued on Ethereum that positions Ethereum as the decentralized world ledger that Vitalik is also now saying it should be. It's not the world computer, it's the world ledger now, right? So that's very important. And this is, in line with the L2 design, is you use Ethereum as the final record of who owns what asset. Now you lock your asset on Ethereum into the L2 canonical bridge contract because you want to do application-specific stuff with it on an L2, like a payments L2 or a private L2 or a perps L2, whatever it is. And here is the problem of now of current day L2s. You lock them up in these bridge contracts, and these contracts are upgradable and owned by a multisig for various reasons. That's the first issue. So goodbye, like Ethereum is out of the picture, to be honest, at this point. Like if a multisig is owning that bridge contract like it is nowadays on L2s or a security council, there's various, of course, degrees of security that these multisigs afford, right? There's shades of gray here, but still it's a multisig. And yeah, so in the ideal case, this is not a multisig anymore. It is, in the ideal case, a smart contract from a rollup that has a rollup state transition function that is natively executed by Ethereum VL1. That's like a native rollup, and that has instant ZK, which Leland and the Succinct team are working on. Instant ZK would be the ideal bridge because actually, when you deploy a rollup on Gelato or another RAS provider, picking a bridge is also like sometimes annoying because you have to work with these third-party bridge provider teams. You have to get them to be interested in your rollup, and normally you also have to pay them a sum to even deploy on your rollup. What they give you in turn, like Layer 0, for example, they're probably the best at it. They give you instant bridging from and to your rollup, and they give you this nice network of routes, right? So that it's often a good deal for teams, but at this point, they're definitely not like these assets that come in via Layer 0 OFTs or something. They are not secured by Ethereum anymore once they enter your rollup, right? Like, so you've given that up completely. And ZK sort of instant ZK removes the need for this, because now you can instantly deposit into a rollup and you can instantly get your money out of a rollup. And if you build some fancy contraption on top of it, like egg layer or something, you can now have instant bridging between these rollups. And this is not done by, like, let's say a Layer 0 server anymore, that like, you know, is very much unsecure versus compared to Ethereum and ZK. It's all done by Ethereum and ZK, right? That's the ideal bridge for Ethereum. I'm saying for Ethereum here because Layer 0 will continue to exist in this world, because they will be happy about this. This is the ironic part. They would love this because they don't like to have the liability of all these assets on their server. That's a huge liability for them. Layer 0 will continue to exist because there will be many chains still existing outside of the Ethereum ecosystem, Solana, whatnot. And Layer 0 will build wrappers on top of these and liquidity on top of these tokens. And they will say, look, on Ethereum, I'm using these routes for max security. At least token issuers can make that, like they can opt in to say, look, on Ethereum, I want my assets to be secured by Ethereum. But then when I go to another chain, I can do I can use a cross or whatnot to go into the same token representation on another chain that isn't secured by Ethereum anymore, but now by some other security model. So yeah, like bridging is it's for L2s, it's really all about bridging. Which is also an interesting question, like that I can open up later, maybe if we just discuss sovereign rollups as well, which are the polar opposite to based native ZK rollups, I would say, because there you don't really have an enshrined bridge anymore like you do on an L2. And there's a question of, like, it's an interesting question, like what bridges will Stripe have, right? Like, will Stripe have a bridge to Ethereum? Will they have a bridge to Solana? Or will they just issue only their own stable coins on that chain and that's it, right? And maybe use Circle's CCTP, for USDC.
Now that you mentioned like USDC, I think there's a fun question. Like, USDC used to be canonically issued on many rollups, and then they invented CCTP, and then they're like, okay, like no need for canonical issuance anymore. I wonder, like, if you have instant finality on all rollups, will Circle ever go back to issuing it via the canonical bridge? But I think like now USDC is so prevalent across like so many chains, like it may be unlikely for them to ever move back. And so I think there is like some urgency to push like advanced ZK technology even faster, so you don't have other really big stable coins saying like, oh, I'm just going to create my own bridging standard, because so much distribution that like having their own bridging standard like makes sense for them. So I think we have this impetus to like move as quickly as possible to like accelerate this technology before more really large assets decide to like build their own custom bridging or use CC2P.
Yeah, maybe also add that I think everybody agrees that ZK is the way, and then based and then native. So like kind of if you look at it from a certain perspective, you could tell that we kind of did like the full circle back to the idea of like shards. So like I would say like the native rollups in the future will behave kind of like the initial ideas about sharding. So that's pretty cool in my opinion. But I will also add that I don't like the approach that is, I think, growing very fast right now, that ZK will just suddenly appear and save all our problems. Ilan will probably not agree with me here. But because primo, not all ZK projects are equal. So like we as L2Beat launched ZK catalog recently. And you can actually see that even using ZK tech as a rollup, there might still be like hidden trust assumption that make it not Ethereum level security anyway. So like I'm curious what how Succinct will position themselves like outside of just like OP Succinct, or maybe like like developing it further. But yeah, I don't like I think like we are still like at least like 2 or 3 years from the basic conception of a native rollup, and like the conception of like the scaling end game, and only then we'll be able to kind of like end, or maybe not end, but like start like developing the last pieces of tech that we need.
No, that's a good point. Like not all like ZK solutions are the same. There are like subtle like differences between them. And this is why like ETH really cares about having like multiple clients, because if one client has a bug, like the chain will hopefully not halt. And they care a lot about like client diversity.
This is actually relevant for the Stripe chain very much. That we probably have
all
just
these
one
new
client.
L1s will not have multi-client, of course. Like building one client's hard enough. So like expecting them to have multiple clients is just like not going to happen. Like even Solana, like building multiple clients has taken a long time for them. Which is also why for Ethereum, like real-time proving, like their goal is to have like 2 or 3 like ZKVMs, like, or well, they're now like a dozen plus ZKVMs, but their goal is to have 2 or 3 achieve like real-time proving, and like maybe they'll enshrine it, maybe they won't, but they definitely want to have like multiple systems out there all providing, I guess, like added security. And so like I think like Tycho is sort of the first version of it, right? They use like R0, they use SP1, they use TEs. You're going to combine as like much technology together to ensure your thing is like secure, and like that one hidden bug doesn't take down your system. That's true.
Yeah, we had to add like a new slice on our pizza for their multi-proofs, but unfortunately it's still red to this day. So yeah, there are some trust assumptions here and there all the time. So
that's the pineapple on the pizza.
Yeah. Exactly. Yes, I think at the end of the day, all of those teams are building very similar things. So it's kind of like chains and bridges, right? So there are like some executional environments, and there are ways to move the assets around them and like move the value around them, right? And the chase here is to basically be to make sure that Ethereum is the first chain that will figure it out, and stay this universal ledger for everything. So that's the future I want to believe in, at least. But everybody is, I guess, allowed to have their own.
So Hubert, you said 2 to 3 years. Let's take the middle and say 2.5 years. I'm going to hold you to that. That's when everything is going to be some level of mature. But with the with Ethereum's North Star to scale L1, we're expecting block latency to go from 12 to 6. Not any next upgrade, not anyone after that, but hopefully anyone after that. Some North Star, that is. But we're expecting that. But I mean, is that and then further block latency reductions after that? Is that going to keep pushing what the definition of real-time proving is on Ethereum? Are we going to get real-time proving if Ethereum keeps cutting down the latency? Leland, I'd love to get an answer from your end, or if it's going to change the pie at all, Hubert, let me know.
Yeah, I think like everybody that is interested in this topic should just probably first check if proofs, then check ZK catalog, and then just talk with all of those teams directly. Because I think like when I was checking most of the ZKVM's roadmaps, I would say that they all have like fairly similar ideas, but they like, one team is saying that they will do it in 1 year, the other one is saying that they will do it in 5 years, and the other one is saying that they will do it in coming soon. So I guess that's a hard question to answer, I would say. So I don't know, like probably Leland is the best person to speak here.
Yeah, I mean, I think within 12 seconds, like with our latest version, like SP1 Hypercube, we were able to prove something around like 90% of blocks or 80% of blocks within those 12 seconds. And there are other teams that are getting like very, very close. Like OpenVM, I think earlier this week released their like GPU benchmarks, and they can prove Ethereum blocks in like 15 seconds. Like if we look like a year ago, like this would have been unbelievable. Like we just like the progress has been asymptotic. And so I do believe or the EF definitely believes that they can get real-time proving like end of year, which from our discussions with them, which is very ambitious. I suspect at least like one team will be able to achieve that, like doing like 99.9% of blocks, or they're like under 12 seconds, and maybe give it a year or two, faster executors, like faster GPUs, like you can possibly see it under 6 seconds. I think this is definitely achievable in the next, or I think 12 seconds definitely achievable by end of year or early next year. In 6 seconds, like maybe in several years.
Yeah, I'm just gonna drill on a little bit more because I mean, to Lewis's point, this is like end game. This is like super important for Ethereum. What you can't do it 90%. 90% is not good enough in under 12 seconds because it tends to leave out probably the most economical blocks, right? Is 99? You said 99.99%. Is that good enough? Is that the goal?
No, I think it needs to be 100%. I agree.
Okay.
It actually needs to be less than 12 seconds because you need to take in kind of like latency of gossiping and stuff like this. But there are things that Ethereum can do to make this like more, to make it easier on the ZKVMs. Like for example, there's some EIPs that will have a cap on how much an individual cap on how much gas an individual transaction can use, and like currently how a lot of ZKVMs do real-time proving is they like prove on a per transaction basis. So if one transaction is really, really big, it slows everything down. And so if you limit how big like a transaction can be, say like maximum like 5 million gas or some arbitrary number, that actually does help speed up like proving time in the worst case scenario. And the EF is like seriously considering like, does it make sense for us to like implement this EIP if it helps like real-time proving?
There's one in Ifusaka upgrade to limit that, right? Later this year. I mean, at least proposed. And then you said, it's 12 seconds now, roughly. Last year, you said that would be unheard of. What was it last year? And then so I'm trying to get like an idea of the trajectory that we're on.
Yeah, last year was in the order of magnitude of minutes.
Okay, so. And is it going to be exponential growth from here, or are we going to like start to hit bottlenecks and be like linear, slowly cutting off a second now here and there?
And it's really hard to say.
Okay,
like last year, we're like, wow, this is really fast, and we found some like tricks that we can do. I think the low-hanging fruit is getting harder to solve, but like we're exploring like new proof systems and entirely new designs, so it's hard to say. Yeah, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I only ask because it's hard to get this information online anywhere else. It's very hush-hush. Like we don't know, right? So even we don't know.
Awesome. We can. I'm gonna do one more shout out for our sponsors, and then we'll take it in one last direction before we close out today, guys. Another quick shout out to Aptos. With nearly 400 million in BTC assets on chain, supported by a secure, fast, and affordable MVM environment, Aptos has become the BTCFi growth chain. Aptos users can now yield on their Bitcoin via Echo's aBTC and OKX's xBTC without the typical bridge risks and high fees. With support from Echo, OKX, and Stacks' SBTC, Aptos is the best place to go for best-in-class yield on Bitcoin. Appreciate the support, Aptos. As well as EigenLayer and EigenCloud. Corporate and protocol treasuries face a major challenge today. Cash and traditional instruments are losing ground to inflation. A new industry report from Liquid Collective and EigenCloud lays out the next evolution of the digital asset treasury, moving beyond just passively holding Bitcoin to actively making digital assets like ETH and SOL productive through liquid staking and restaking. For CFOs, DATs, and corporate treasurers, the path to integrating liquid staking and restaking should be risk managed and aligned with long-term strategic goals. The Productive Treasury Report outlines practical adoption and a forward-looking vision for the role of the modern treasury as a strategic enabler of new technology. Read the Productive Treasury Report today by following the link in today's show notes. Jump back into it. If anybody had anywhere else they wanted to take that convo, but one thing I wanted to ask, which I think feels kind of prescient, and maybe loops everything back together to this idea of Stripe launching their own chain is, I think we've been hitting some of these walls in the conversation here of like, Mark and Leland going back and forth on, how many years until real-time proving is really, really, really real-time, especially if things continue to speed up. Same goes for like, at what point in time are we getting, native rollups that are actually, live and real? Is there sort of like a race and maybe a risk here when we consider some of these large institutions kind of coming on chain? You already have Coinbase, exploring and making waves with Base. Robinhood obviously is another big one, and their sort of rollout and work with Arbitrum. And then obviously all the conversation around Stripe today. Is there sort of a risk here from a timeline perspective of, if these, sort of Rollup and ZK proving and other necessities to like really get this ideal system put together take too long? These large corporations and companies and other players who might come on chain are sort of forced or get stuck. Like, they choose to go a certain direction, and then maybe that's just good enough. And there's not really a reason for them to maybe change course at some point in the future. Would love any thoughts on this, like how we're thinking about it.
Yeah, I think I would flip it to there's a lot of opportunity right now that Ethereum doesn't want to miss, I'm sure. So it's all about the opportunity, but sometimes I think we have to step away. We're all like fully like working on crypto full time, right? So we are all very impatient. Like a day in crypto is very long and a year is very short. Like it's crazy, right? Like, and I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves of what we're doing here. We're literally revolutionizing, disrupting the world of finance, the world of payments, completely like the world of banking. We're disrupting that, right? And like this will be a multi-decade up to a century journey, because at the end of it, the world will look very different to what it looked like before. So this is like a sort of this is the revolution of our time, probably together with AI, and a 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 year horizon is simply too short. Even though we like 2 or 3 years in crypto seems like a century, right? But in reality, what we're building here and so on will echo far into the future, and it will keep being updated, and it will take a very long time to reach its final form. At which point, the old institutions that we know today, like Visa, MasterCard, Western Union, and so on, who knows if they will even be around to see the end of this revolution, right? So this is what I'm saying here, but it doesn't mean we should be complacent. I think we should also have some focus in Ethereum and elsewhere. And ZK, there's always been talk that it's almost ready. If you listen to Succinct, it's ready now. And we have to put the pedal to the metal and prove it. Because you always need some early adopters, right? Like that's always like the hard part about crossing the chasm. I will say that I think there can be, like, if let's say Stripe, everyone, they launched their L1 now, why would they move to L2s or something like a more Ethereum aligned architecture in the future? either two options, either because it will benefit them massively, because they will save a lot of cost this way and increase profit margins. That's the obvious one. The other one is because they will be almost forced to, because their shit will be hacked, right? And there's gonna be 0 days. I'm still surprised that we haven't seen a major bridge hack in a longer time, but remember 3-4 years ago, the bridge hacks were commonplace, like Ronin Bridge, Binance, Wormhole, like massive hacks, right? Like, who says that Circle's CCTP will never be hacked? That would be disastrous, catastrophic, right? At this point, they might reconsider having their own server attestation servers for bridging and going back to a ZK instant bridging with Ethereum. That might be very compelling after such a hack, right? So two options, either it will be cheaper for them and they will have higher profit margins, or they will be forced to because, fuck around and find out at some point with all of this stuff. And if we proliferate this technology and everybody's launching a chain, application chains and tokens and bridges, this and this and that, there's so many targets on our back and Lazarus will find them, right? Like if they can do the Bybit hack, they can like, that was a hard one, right? Like they can I'm sure many of the chains that will launch will have some issues there. So I think these are the two vectors for bringing people back to Ethereum. And what is Ethereum even doing? Ethereum is an exporter of censorship resistance and thanks to ZK of security as the world ledger, because hacking Ethereum is impossible. Like it's not impossible, but we know how hard it is, right? Hacking Wormhole, Layer 0, whatnot, all of these like Chainlink, whatnot, is much easier than hacking Ethereum. So if Ethereum wants to be the world ledger, I think then ZK is the unlock to export assets on the world ledger to chains with ZK, which and you will still have Layer 0 and so on, because this will be the Ethereum chain system, the most secure one. But you will have other systems that aren't part of the system that still need to be connected somehow. They will have less security. But yeah, like I think it's an interesting question also to ask why, does Stripe care about bridging? They actually explicitly said they don't care about Ethereum bridging. I think we sometimes forget that the main purpose of L2s is to get the same pristine version of Ethereum on your chain, right? Of ETH, the asset, I mean. And actually, interestingly, if you look at the data, and nowadays L2s, while they have high TVL, it's like ETH is actually like the amount of ETH on L2s is very small, right? So this already shows you that they are a much worse version than Ethereum is for ETH, the asset. So like,
and the outflows are growing as well, like since like a couple months. So actually, like they are getting it's getting even worse.
The ultimate test for an L2, first and foremost, is before we go to whether Stripe uses or not, like that's like the end game. It's like, are Ethereum holders using L2s with ETH? And that we're not even there yet, right? Like we can't even convince Ethereum holders to put the ETH on these L2s. So we're very long way to go for inside the Ethereum ecosystem. But yeah, like there's even a question like, does Stripe want any canonical bridge, or do they say no, we simply issue 3 stablecoins on this chain natively, and all we need is the ledger to be secured, and we're building our nice little sort of validator system for that, right? In this world, I still think they would be better off being a rollup than being an L1, and there's this little known architecture called a sovereign rollup, which I call rollup L1, and the only difference to a normal L2 would be that you don't have a bridge. So maybe you also don't have ZK on a sovereign rollup because you don't need it, because normally ZK is very useful for securing the bridge. And like even in that world, I would say at the very least, even if Stripe says, look, we don't need a bridge to Ethereum, we don't care about ETH asset, we don't care about issuing our assets on Ethereum, we're fine with issuing them on our own ledger and securing them with our validator set. Like that last part is, I think, whereas like you should still become a rollup and use a more decentralized validator set like Ethereum's or Celestia's to secure your rollups, your chain's consensus and immutability. So yeah, whether you need to become base native and ZK very much depends on whether you want to use Ethereum as the world ledger. And there's very good reasons to do that. You get a lot of security, I think, for cheap in the future. But even if you don't want to do that, even if Stripe simply doesn't want to do that ever, they should still not be an L1. They should still be a rollup. And on the other extreme side of like here you have the Ethereumness, the base native ZK version. On the other extreme end of that spectrum, you have a sovereign rollup that simply doesn't have any settlement client, any bridge to another settlement layer, but it still uses a consensus DA layer like Ethereum. Sovereign rollups are a concept invented by Celestia, but they can very much exist on Ethereum as well. Like Ethereum or Celestia to not have to build your own validator set. So like that's a no-brainer for me. If Stripe doesn't want to become an Ethereum L2 for whatever reason, they don't need it or whatnot, they should still be a rollup, I think, on Ethereum if Ethereum's DA scales a bit better for me, because to be honest, Ethereum's DA is very constrained still. Or another DA layer that is more higher bandwidth already, like Celestia.
Yeah, I think my view on this is like there are always companies who want to like roll their own tech stack. And I think this is like just like human nature. Humans like enjoy creating their own things, like whether it's your own blockchain or own rollup stack or building in something else. Like there are just teams out there who will like never use Ethereum, never use Solana. They were like, we're going to build everything in-house, and like that's totally fine. But then there's like a large category of companies such as Robinhood who are like willing to use existing technology out there, or like companies who are maybe on the fence, like should we go with Ethereum or should we, or Ethereum as in building an L1, building a rollup, etc., or rolling their own stack. And I think Mark has a really good point where more corporates are deciding to go on-chain. And the question is like, what pieces of technology do we need to have out there to facilitate this transition? And I mean, I would argue like if you have rollups that are very high throughput, I mean, this is actually sufficient. If you look at Base right now, they do 100, 120 TPS. They have a lot of assets that they that are native to the chain. Like their customers were kind of oblivious to this. I think the most important thing is just like scaling up like TPS and having gigagas for rollups. And then I think with that, a lot of corporates will be like, oh, high performance chain that's like tied to Ethereum that we can inherit their assets. Perfect. Like this finality stuff doesn't really matter because we'll have our own like custom bridges, and like because we're big enough, like people don't necessarily need to trust, like people can trust us because we have like a great reputable brand in the system. I think for some like random rollup like ZK matters a lot, because if you're a random rollup, like who are you? You don't have a name, you don't have a brand. Versus like for Robinhood, like, oh, if all the bridges are trusted, like users already deposit, $100,000 into the Robinhood account. Like if you already trust them to hold $100,000 for your brokerage account, like you also trust them to like bridge money across too. And so I think like the most important thing is just like having higher throughput rollups. I think ZK is definitely a great, nice to have, and sometimes essential for more emergent users that like don't have as a robust brand in the space. And also, ZK makes life much easier for developers too by having fast bridging, of course.
I think it's a good point. I just quickly wanted to say, like for me, blockchains are inherently B2B technologies. I don't say that a user will ever know or knowingly select, I want the native base, whatever thing. No, please, like no way, right? But a company like Robinhood or even big banks, sometimes we think these guys are flawless, but big banks are losing hundreds of millions of dollars in mistakes, frauds, hacks every year, like billions of dollars, billions of dollars. So they will eventually be the ones that pick the technology that reduces their risk and liability, I think, right? Like, so it's not so much a question of whether a user trusts Robinhood or so. It's more a question of, does Robin have a way to protect their risk and reduce the risk and even losses to hacks and frauds, I think. And that's where ultimately like decentralized blockchain technologies also really shine. I mean, we know most centralized bridges and exchanges at some point were hacked. But Bitcoin, Ethereum never had a hack, never had anything stolen.
Well, I mean, there was like ETH Classic for a reason, but that's in the past.
That's a smart contract hack. That's not a blockchain hack, right?
Sure,
like,
fine.
Of course, smart contracts get hacked all the time.
Yeah, great shout out. I think I agree with you, Lewis, on this point around at least today there are certainly there's certainly a big like cost and effort trade-off to launch and bootstrap a brand new layer 1 chain versus just shipping an L2 or rollup somewhere, anywhere really, whether it's ETH or not. But of course, the resources on the EVM side are quite massive at this point in that space. So yeah, when you consider, a corporation maybe getting into like, an experimentation of launching some on-chain ecosystem or apps, it seems like from like a raw cost and effort trade-off that it would just make sense today to go and do that in an L2 roll-up manner, or if it's an L3 or what have you. But in the most simplistic and probably one of the cheapest ways to do it today, rather than bootstrapping an entirely new chain. But yeah, I guess and I think you mentioned this early on in the pod, but for Stripe, for Paradigm, since this is sort of like a co-led venture, I guess some of those other aspects that that are frequent talking points within the space, at least, is there going to be a token? Is there sort of maybe going to be an L1 premium associated with that? Are they maybe looking for, to get that attached valuation to this network by launching a chain like an L1 chain versus doing a rollup or some other design? Maybe those are swaying their decision at this point in time. And maybe those factors don't play as large of a role in the future if things continue to shift from, constant new L1s with big high premiums and big dollar signs next to them versus, maybe more apps or more chains or more corporations just launching a, quick and easy, cheap solution via a rollup or, whatever that simplest and easiest expression is versus, bootstrapping and building an entirely new network.
Yeah, I think, you would expect someone like Stripe to launch an L1 because they can actually pull it off, right? Like, they could also make this L1 really decentralized. Like Solana has done this, right? Like, so Ethereum is not the only network that can build like a decentralized blockchain. If you have the distribution, the money, I think you can build it. Probably not to the same degree that Ethereum has, but you can at least try to get closer to that. Smaller projects, they should always launch rollups, L2s, because they simply don't have a chance of building a proper L1. At some point, if you don't care about decentralization, censorship resistance at all, then you like Ethereum also shouldn't matter to you, because Ethereum is all about that. Ethereum exports censorship resistance, global censorship resistance. I would say that's the main export. Why is that interesting? Well, it allows businesses and commerce to span multiple jurisdictions and to have a truly internet global commerce and permissionless innovation happen, right? Like it's a sort of big picture thing, and it's there for the world of global payments, commerce, social media, whatnot, right? So I think a big company it's totally makes sense for them to think about an L1 because they probably have a shot there. The interesting question for me is, at what point are rollups and L2s, right? Again, they're not the same thing per se. L2s are rollups, but there's also L1 rollups, like sovereign rollups. At what point are they more interesting even for the companies that have these massive budgets and that could pull off their own L1? And for me, that's simply when they can achieve, what is Stripe pursuing? Again, they might just be chasing an L1 premium. I don't know, right? But technically, anything that they said, their batch payment, whatever application-specific optimizations that they did, this has nothing to do with L1, L2. That's like a VM customization, and you might as well take that VM and make an L2 out of it, right? Like the L2s are execution environments. The oldest L2 was like StarkX or something, right? So it's L2s support any custom execution environment, any highly parallelized payment system. You can make the SVM, the Solana virtual machine, into an L2, like Eclipse has been trying to do and so on, right? Anything goes on an L2. The only issue is, for an L2, you then also have to build the proving mechanism. That can be a bit harder for fraud proofs, for sure. Like OP and Arbitrum all build very custom implementations to get fraud proofs done. I think Succinct with SP1, they actually have a generalized prover for Rust, so maybe even that will be easier in the future. But yeah, like ultimately the question here is, if you truly want to build a decentralized global system that is much better than Western Union, Visa, or whatnot, because it's truly decentralized anywhere, anybody on the globe can like treat this as the world ledger, and they know that they won't be arbitrarily censored by a validator in that system. If that is your goal, then Ethereum should have the right solutions for you. And I believe Stripe actually wants to have a shot at that goal, because that's the biggest goal that they could chase, right? And it's true that Ethereum L2s right now simply don't offer Stripe a clear way, like right now, to build that. It might seem easier to them to just try and build it from scratch, like consensus network layer based. I mean, but in a hypothetical world where Stripe can get the highest degree of decentralization at a much cheaper cost of investment than what they have now, then I think that if that was clear to them, evident to them, then the calculus is very simple. Like if they're honest about their goal to be a permissionless global payments layer, which I think they're honest about, and Ethereum can get them to the end state of that, like the most decentralized state, instantly, not progressively like they're doing now, and for a cheaper cost than spinning up their own validator network. I don't even know how these validators work. Is it proof of stake? They said they don't want a cryptocurrency token, so are they gonna be paid by dollars? How is that gonna work? How are they getting paid if transactions are zero? None of these things are answered, for me at least right now, right? Like we'll find out. But if they want to have a robust global system, and to be fair to Ethereum is that, Bitcoin is that, right? Then I think eventually there is a moment where they will reconsider their choices, and right now is not that moment. We have to be honest to ourselves. Ethereum simply isn't ready for that, right? And we can get there.
Awesome. I think we can call it there. Good closeout from Lewis. What I'd love to do though is Lewis, Leland, Hubert, if each of you guys want to just do a quick shout out if you got stuff coming up with your respective protocols, projects that you want to shout out before we close out for today. It was great having you on, and I'll kind of roll out the red carpet for you to say your piece.
Yeah, so we actually have a new ZK rollup going to mainnet later this month. So we're really excited and hope you guys use it or interact with it. And then also we'll be shortly releasing a new version of SP1 in the coming months.
Yeah, so for us, that will be 2 new sections on L2Beat. So the first one will be dedicated to specific stack ecosystems. So like OP stack, Arbitrum, Orbit, and so on. I think you will like it very much, because you will be able to very easily compare those stacks between each other. And the second is this new framework for bridges, but this will come a bit later. Not sure if it will be this year, but we will do our best to achieve it.
Yeah, so on our end, same old, you can launch your L2s and rollups with us, whether it's Arbitrum, OP, all the good stuff. You can use our Paymaster Bundler 7702 systems if you want to build cool on-chain smart wallets, gasless wallets, account-abstracted wallets, all of that stuff. And in the rollup land, we've been working with the Succinct team quite closely. And I think you can expect Gelato to have some Succinct powered ZK rollups in the not too distant future as well. We will contribute to that. And yeah, we have also been experimenting with based rollup technology. And there will be some exciting announcements about some of the bigger customers that Gelato has that are also interested in becoming based Ethereum rollups, and we're helping them to get there. So yeah, that's that from my end. And again, I'm just chilling. I hope you guys can put it into the podcast notes, the show notes. My Ethereum settlement score, revitalizing the rollup-centric roadmap post on ETH Research, and also the Blockworks article that Mark wrote that is referencing that.
Yeah, drop that link over to me afterwards. We'll make sure we get it in the pod notes for sure. But otherwise, awesome. Thanks so much, guys, for coming on today. It was a great discussion. Really appreciate you all making the time. But otherwise, we will see you and the viewers next time. So appreciate y'all. Have a great weekend. Certainly touch some grass. I think, Lewis, you commented on it. Days in crypto are very long, so it's great to get away from the screens. And if you can make time to touch grass, definitely do so. So awesome. Everyone enjoy your weekends. And again, it was great having you all on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See ya. Great convo.